AGI is a new age religion that was intentionally created by a cult leader, Sam Altman, who is also a good example of a plastic shaman. So, in the Native American tribes, they would refer to people who were fraudulent, self proclaimed spiritual advisors who are new age people as plastic shamans. And so these were non natives who would pose as Native American authors and create all this mystical, stuff that was happening to justify the fraud that they were going to perform. Likewise, when I hear the Blood in the Machine interview from Karen Howe about her book Empire of AI, one of the things she mentions in her book is that it is a religion that Sam Altman was after. He wanted to create a religion, which is really a company. And so if you look at this word and you look at the phrasing religion, and you look at, I want to create a religion, who else has said this? Well, L. Ron Hubbard, the creator, the science fiction writer of the famous cult Scientology. So if we see what's happening with OpenAI and we see all of the claims of AGI is right around the corner, it's coming soon. We also hear this from Elon Musk, AGI is right around the corner. There's no evidence that there's any form of intelligence that will reach human level, partially because we have no idea how to replicate biological consciousness. Consciousness is not present in any kind of machine learning tool. A machine learning tool is effectively an X and a Y, and you do a prediction based on what the next value is in the plot. There's no magic happening. It's just a pattern matching tool that you can use to get insights. Same with machine learning. The narrow AI that we have currently with coding assistants is very useful. It's very useful to look at, for example, an agent, have it look at a README file, and then use some auto completion to, maybe add a section in your README file or to write a test for you. But this is not even close to intelligence. This is just a pattern matching system that has been combined with other pattern matching systems into multiple narrow AI solutions. Narrow AI is really useful, and it's really similar to basic automation that we've been using for companies like Toyota. They have a good example of this with the Toyota Way of Principles, where you're building all these different solutions together, and then you combine them into a solution that does some form of automation. Machine learning is very useful at doing this kind of automation, but it has no form of intelligence. And I think the best way to think about every time you hear a person say AGI is to think about the fact that they're likely a cult leader or a plastic shaman. So they're using this mystical terminology. Again, we have no evidence that there's been any progress made towards creating human consciousness, just like we have zero evidence that space aliens have come down and kidnapped people or put UFOs on Earth. There's lots of people that make claims about this, but there is no hard evidence. Likewise, there is no hard evidence about a Bigfoot. There is no hard evidence about a Loch Ness monster, right? There's all kinds of, mystical things that we can hear about. We can hear about ghosts. We can hear about vampires. We can hear about werewolves, right? These are all interesting, conceptually, like as mystical, spiritual things. We've also heard about the biblical rapture, right? Hey, any day now, God is going to come back and he's going to, pull everybody up that's a Christian and put them into space somewhere. And then everybody will be left behind and the Antichrist will come, et cetera, et cetera. All kinds of religions have these cult-based mystical things that they talk about. And by themselves, they're interesting, right? Like, the rapture, that sounds kind of cool. In fact, they made multiple movies about the rapture. But then if we look at the evidence, well, where's the evidence that points to the rapture? Where's the evidence that points to people being like space aliens trapped on Earth, like in Scientology? Where's the evidence for, mystical, shamanistic ideas of, creatures coming out of rocks and turning into, medicine man? And where's all this mystical stuff coming from? It's a story that was written down on a piece of paper, but there's no evidence that actually backs it up. That's really the best way to think about AGI, is that anytime you hear a person with a straight face bring up AGI, likely they're a con artist, or likely they're a plastic shaman, a new age kind of spiritualist who is a magical thinker who's trying to trick people into getting more money. And that's what's very fascinating, is that any company, Elon Musk is a good example, Sam Altman's a good example, any company that's profiting from this spirituality or this religion is a company that likely has some form of fraudulent activity. Again, just looking at the history of people who use those cult type words, it's possible that this kind of fraud is occurring at these companies that use the word AGI. If there was actually evidence for it, that would be different, right? If there was evidence that we had discovered, a biological mechanism of human consciousness, and then created a digital version of that, and then in scientific research we were replicating human consciousness, and then we were making machines that could be conscious. And again, for consciousness, my best definition would be back to one of my mentors at Caltech's computational neuroscience lab, Dr. Joseph Bogan, who's since passed away, but as a neurosurgeon, he told me consciousness is really about being aware of something that you weren't aware of before. So if someone tells you, hey, you have pressure on the bottom of your seat because you're sitting, you then become conscious of that pressure. And so that awareness, right, of your situation, the awareness of your surrounding, that's really like a simple example of what consciousness is from a biological perspective. We have zero evidence of this occurring with an agent from, a vendor that sells generative AI. It's nonsense. What we do have is actually some useful tools that, if they're used properly, you constrain the problem to what typically you would do with CI/CD and DevOps, that you can use these slightly more advanced forms of automation to make some progress. What's sad is that something that is actually pretty useful, but where there's no competitive advantage between any vendor that sells them, it's a commodity product, that many people who lack critical thinking are being led to think that some magical alien life form is going to come onto Earth and take over, or some mystical shaman will appear and a witch doctor will grant people superpowers. Like it's a magical belief system when we talk about AGI. And so to summarize, it was such a good piece of final information for me to make this type of decision about what really is happening with these companies that say AGI, is that it's intentional fraud meant to deceive people, and there's no scientific evidence that there is AGI, and it's a way of collecting money, collecting investment, and it's a way to distract people from the fact that these companies have no competitive advantage at all. Literally anybody can collect data, train a machine learning model, create a agent that fits on top of it, and then tell it to do things that are basic automation. We've been doing these basic kinds of automation with CI/CD systems for years and years and years. We've done basic automation with auto completion for years and years and years. What we have with the agentic AI or with coding assistance is just a small tweak that looks more powerful than it is, because multiple narrow AI solutions are chained together with that deceptive user interface. I do think that narrow AI is pretty useful, but it has absolutely nothing to do with AGI. And a better way to put it as well would be to think about the concept of creationism. So creationism is a reframing of science to use science within the world of the Bible. And so if you look at, for example, a creationist, what a creationist would say is, well, it's true that, we have some stuff that makes it look like the earth is millions of years old, but the Bible says it's not. So we're going to actually reframe everything so that it fits what the Bible says. Or, hey, in the Bible it says there's a great flood, so we're going to invent something called diluvial geology, where everything has to revolve around there was a great flood and wiped everything out, and Noah's Ark saved certain things. So if you think about AGI, it has actually a little bit more in common as well with this kind of pseudoscientific creationism where you reframe things to fit this particular narrative. So I think it's worth really thinking through who says the word AGI. What is it that they actually gain by saying the words AGI? And then finally, is it in fact simply just a new age religion run by plastic shamans? And in fact, is our famous plastic shaman Sam Altman of OpenAI?